Who's a fiance over there?
Bigger than me, yeah.
You're good to go.
Okay. Hi, I'm Carol Schlagheck. I'm a journalism professor at Eastern Michigan University, which several of you know, since I have a few of my students and former students in the crowd. So you may have heard some of this, you'll hear it again. But our topic tonight is citizen journalists and FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. I probably will stray a little bit from just the federal and state Freedom of Information Act and also get into other open meetings laws, and possibly we'll talk, if we have time, about some other ways that you can gather information as a supplement to some of the things that you can't necessarily get from government, but might supplement things that you're looking at if you're looking for information for stories, or as one of the focuses tonight really is going to be on, this is for everybody, not just reporters. So this photo here, sunshine is our theme tonight. Sunshine, focusing on this picture I actually stole from the Monroe News, was in the paper last week. It's a sunrise over Lake Erie. It was a citizen journalist who took this photograph and posted it on their blog, and he put his name as Frankenstein or something, otherwise I'd be giving him credit for who the guy is, but it was a picture that just represents sunshine, which is kind of our theme, because most of you are reporters in the room, so you probably know this, but the general public thinks that we, do I need to be able to this one?
No, you're fine.
Okay, thinks that we have access to all of this mysterious information that they could never get a hold of. And that, because we have the magic press pass, we have information that enables us to do these fantastic stories. And what I like to impress upon my students, especially those who are not journalism majors, is that's not necessarily true. Reporters get all those great stories because they have special access, right? Well, the answer you all know is wrong. We do not have special access. In some cases, yes, the press pass will get you into the football, the press room or something, or it'll get you access in some ways to some people in some places. But when it comes to documents and meetings and the basics of what government is doing, we have no more access than anyone else. By law, a journalist has no more access to public documents than any citizen does, which I think the vast majority of citizens do not realize this. Most journalists simply have a better understanding of the Freedom of Information Act and how to use it. We know how to use it. As a result, people often come to us and ask us to help them get information that they really could get themselves. And I think that one of the reasons that this was law was to help everybody, not to help journalists, certainly. I'm not sure they would pass a law to help us. And so we need to spread the word that this is there for everybody, and I think that also helps protect these laws so that they go forward, is that we're trying to show the benefit. Government in the sunshine, have you heard that term? I know you folks, I hope, have heard this term. I usually draw a really bad sun on the board and say what's this mean, but government in the sunshine. Just help me out here. What do you think that means? Government in the sunshine. And most of our meetings are after dark, so why are we talking about government in the sunshine?
Shining the light on government.
Yeah, shining the light. The rays of the sun are actually coming down and showing what people are doing, as opposed to what? What would be the opposite of that?
In dark, secrecy.
Yeah, sort of the stereotypical dark, smoke-filled room, the back room where the guys, and most of them used to be guys, would get together and smoke their cigars and make their decisions, and we'll let you know when you need to know, kind of thing. That this is just the opposite of that, we're trying to shine light on what they're doing and make it accessible to everybody and let people know what's going on. Onto this broad umbrella category of government in the sunshine, hence my sunshine. Our FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, and also open meetings laws, which we'll talk about a little bit. But the Freedom of Information Act actually was signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson, July 4th, 1966. States, all 50 states eventually adopted their own versions of it. That everybody has a version of the FOIA, which regarding the state documents as well as the federal documents. And then open meetings laws really caught on in the 70s. And by 1976 and forward, every state really had rules that said the public's allowed to be at our meetings. Now, think for a second about what was going on in the 1960s and the 1970s, that why in the world would government come to the conclusion that, gee, we ought to let people see what we're doing, we ought to let our documents be a little bit more public, we ought to let you come to our meeting. What was going on? You guys are all too young. What was going on? I don't have a lot of history, but come on. What was going on in the 60s and 70s? Many people think.
Vietnam.
Yeah, I mean, Vietnam certainly.
Civil rights.
Civil rights.
I was saying Watergate.
Watergate. All these things, right, made us think, oh, we can't always trust the government. We can't always trust them. I don't know. I always go back to, question Mad Men, maybe you get a different idea, but you go back to like the 50s and the early 60s, and I think maybe it was a more naive time. That maybe you thought the people in control were doing what they needed to do, and maybe didn't bother your little head about that. At some point, certainly with Vietnam, people started to question things and started to say, the famous CBS story where the numbers on casualties were wrong and the government was not giving us that information. Some of the government spokesmen came out 20 and 30 years later and said, yeah, CBS was right. We gave them a lot of bad talk about that, but they were right. A lot of things going on. I was in high school when Watergate happened, and everyone wanted to be a reporter after that. And Watergate basically brought down Richard Nixon, and there was just a massive entrance into journalism schools. And I remember people saying to me, like some people are saying now, are you going to major in journalism? There are no jobs in there. There's a lot of people that want to do that, and not enough jobs to go around. So my lesson for the journalism students always is, well, there's always jobs for the good ones. And that's true. I'm not kidding. I've actually had, those of you who are journalism students, I've had people ask me for students in the last year or two that I couldn't supply because they wanted a certain specialization or they wanted more experience than somebody had. But there are jobs for people who are good. There's not massive numbers of jobs for entry-level people with mediocre skills, but there's a lot of jobs for people who are good. So we'll talk about that too. Okay, Michigan Public Act 267 of 1976 is the Michigan Public Open Meetings Law, which is near and dear to my heart. I'll come back to that. I have a handout for that. This is just a screenshot. I thought this was kind of fun to include this. This is actually the Act, the 1976. This Act may be cited as the Government in the Sunshine Act, which I thought was kind of cool. It is hereby declared to be the policy of the United States that the public is entitled to the fullest practicable information regarding the decision-making processes of the federal government, which I think is a great thing. I think we're supposed to know what's going on. I think that they have to tell us and we have to ask. And I hate to say it, but the older I get, the more cynical I get about whether they're telling us the truth, and that comes from experience. I started out younger than you as a reporter, seriously, in high school and then in a weekly paper when I was like 18, and I was very naive. I trusted everybody. I printed what they told me, and I found myself in hot water more than once because I found that somebody lied to me. The fact that they knew my parents didn't mean they wouldn't lie to me. The fact that one was an usher in my church didn't mean that he wouldn't lie to me. And so as you get older and wiser as a reporter, you start to think, oh, all these government officials are not always telling me the truth. That goes for everybody. But, it's an eye-opener for you if you go into it thinking that the world is just wonderful. And so the older you get, sometimes the more you think, okay, Kevin Devine always uses this quote that we laugh about, if your mother tells you, it's raining, check it out or something, don't believe her, it's like, don't believe anybody, it's check it out. Okay, this is a handout that I already passed out on Michigan's Freedom of Information Act. I think I kept the color copy for myself, maybe I didn't. Okay, here it is, the sunshine, sorry, yours are black and white. Sunshine Week. I always miss this, but March, it's usually March. Sunshine Week in Michigan is to bring attention to this. And sometimes you'll see newspapers and other media putting out a little bit of information about this during that week, and they sort of publicize what your rights are and sort of educate you about this. But I like it because it helps regular folks, not just journalists, understand what the law is. It defines it here, step 1, step 2, step 3, this is kind of fuzzy, you can't read it up here, but you can read your handout. Define a public body. What is a public body in Michigan? You wouldn't believe the number of students I have who want to FOIA the bank document or something, or they want to FOIA that business to find out how many, coney dogs they sold at the festival. You can't do that. What constitutes a public body is what would be the first clue?
Taxpayer money.
Yeah, taxpayer money. It's always the follow money. If it's funded by the taxpayers, then there's some obligation to share information. A state officer, employee, agency, department, division, bureau, board, commission, council, authority, or other body. So a Parks and Recreation Board, yes. I mean, it can be small. A library board, is library funded by the taxpayers, which libraries are. So figure out who a public body is. Ask for records. Upon providing a public body's FOIA coordinator with a written request that describes the public record succinctly to enable the public body to find the public record, a person has a right to inspect copy or receive copies. Wait for the response, file an appeal if you have to, and report any trouble to the Attorney General. It's just a little education that I think most reporters at some stage learn this, but again, I want the public to understand this. I want people to understand that this is there for them too. And we'll talk a little bit about how the public might use that and why. Okay, I'm going to skip through this slide because I'm missing a question mark here on the last one. Which meetings must be open? I kind of just said that. For the most part, a publicly funded body that is spending your tax dollars, their meetings have to be open. There are ways that people get around that if they want to get around it. I mean, part of this is, the intent. And if their intent is good, they'll follow the law and we'll all be happy. And if their intent is not so great, then they will always find a way to get around it. I hate to say that, but it's true. I mean, if a public body wants to do something privately and secretly, they'll find a way. For a while, there was a lot of emailing going around with, public bodies with just, we do this in the English department sometimes. We have to make a decision, and we don't have time to get together, and so we email all the members of a little committee. It's not something that's spending your money, so it's not really public, but it's like, if we have a little committee to do something, we just send around a memo and say, okay, what does everybody think about this? And we all chime in, and we agree, and we do it. Well, if you're a city council, you can't do that. If you're a city council, you have to have a public vote, you have to take public comment, you have to have a decision that's public. One of the ways that sometimes they get around it, we won't spend too much time on this, but is subcommittees maybe that are less than a quorum. We'll just have you two go off and study this and come back and report to us. So all of your studying and all that is sort of on your own time, and it's not very open and public unless they want to make it public. And then they come back to us, but the full board decides. And that's hard sometimes when you're young to understand where the distinctions are, and when you're intimidated easily by the boards that are usually experienced people know all this. How is the public notified? There's a whole set of circumstances for that. They usually post it on their websites now. They have to post it within so many hours. If they have a special meeting, there has to be notification. If you ask to be notified, which most newspapers are on record is asking to be notified. Sometimes citizens groups are, sometimes neighborhood groups are, that we want to be notified if you have a special meeting about this. And is there a watchdog in the room, which often is our function, is just to be in the room. There often are times when I swear bodies have done something or they have not done something just based on who's in the room. If the reporter's there, I always wished I could be there when I wasn't there. Does that make sense? You always wished you could hear what they were saying if you hadn't come to the meeting. They probably would have said what they really thought. But because you're there, maybe they're tempering a little bit or whatever, or you're here afterwards. They said these horrible things, and you weren't here to get that newspaper. They would have said, they sort of temper it. So is there a watchdog in the room that's sort of taking check to say, was there a quorum there? Did they allow public hearing? Did they really cut off that person and not let them talk at all? Different things. I do like to talk just for a second about closed sessions. There are some sharp distinctions in the Act. Where's my list here? Open meetings laws in Michigan. This is, I gave you this handout too, right? This is the Michigan Citizens' Rights. Again, Michigan Citizens' Rights. It doesn't say, this is for reporters get to come to these meetings. This is Michigan citizens, it's anybody who wants to come to this meeting. I have a couple, you can't have them, I'm sorry. Little wallet cards. They now make them so you can go to their website, the Michigan Press Association, and you can download this and fold it up and put it in your wallet. And do that, keep this. With the text of the Michigan Open Meetings Act, do you all have these? Have you seen these before? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, good. You need these. They used to just give them to you if you called the Michigan Press Association. I think they stopped doing that. It's now on their website. You can download it. And I would suggest, if you put it on heavy paper and fold it, you can put it in your wallet. Requires meetings of public body to be open. A public body is one exercising governmental or proprietary functions and includes boards and committees, but does not include the judiciary, Workers' Compensation Appeal Board, Employment Security Appeals Board. There's a list, Teachers Tenure Commission, there's a list of boards that doesn't apply to, but it tells you who it does. One of the most important things on this list is it tells you what the exceptions are. But there are some things they're allowed to have a closed meeting about. There are some things where they are allowed to ask you to leave the room, go home, come back. We'll tell you what we do later. Exceptions on here. This is where I'm a little bit nervous about your situation. Evaluation, dismissal, or discipline of a public officer or employee, or dismissal or discipline of a student when the person involves requests. Okay, if they request a closed hearing, then it's closed. I like to ask students, when would you want an open meeting? If they were coming after me and going to fire me, and I was a public employee, and maybe I was a city manager, and some of the city councilmen didn't like me, and they were going to rake me over the coals at tonight's city council meeting, why in the world would I call you and say, be there, I'm going to ask for an open hearing? Wouldn't I just say, no, put a newspaper over my face and say, I'm going to hide from the media, I don't want you here. Why would I say I want to have a public meeting?
Let everybody know about it, so it's not brushed under the rug.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you want to stand up and hear the allegations and have a chance to respond to them publicly and let people know what's going on. And I mean, that's one of the great things about this free and open society is we have the right to do that. You know, people are always upset about people's names being in the paper for being arrested or charged with a crime, or there's always things that are humiliating, embarrassing to certain folks for being in the paper, and that's embarrassing. And I hear that, I understand that, but I also say, you know, there are many countries that do not put in the newspaper what happens to people. There are people who disappear and are never heard from again, and you never hear that they were in jail and they were charged with a crime and maybe they were, you know, killed, dismissed somehow. And that's part of our democracy, for better or for worse. That's what happens. Anyway, we're allowed to be there. They have to keep minutes. It's very good. One story I like to tell is, you know, if you know this law, if you know this and you memorize this little card, you probably know the Open Meetings Act better than many government officials. And I don't mean that that's a negative to them, it's just that that's not the only thing they're learning when they're elected to a position, and they're trying to do a lot of things, and they sort of look to others to help them figure out when the meeting is open and when it's closed. But if you're in the room and you know, you can make sure they follow the law. And I love to tell stories of doing this when I was very young, like in my early 20s, and in a meeting with a bunch of city council members who are all, you know, 50 plus, and half of them are lawyers, and they're on this committee, and they're all going to go into closed session to discuss something. And I distinctly remember one case in particular raising my hand and saying, under what exception are you going into this meeting? And they were like, blah, 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 and they didn't want to tell me, and they didn't know, and they were going back and forth, and I finally said, well, the newspaper wants to go on record opposing this meeting, that we think this has to be open. And they were really mad, and they sent the city attorney, took a break, sent the city attorney upstairs, you know, and I was just, and he came back downstairs and said, well, she's right. You can't do it. So they had to talk about it publicly, what they could talk about. Now, I'm not a fool. I know they all talked about it on the phone later. You know, they find a way to do it without my presence. But, you know, I did feel like I was the person in the room that night who was sort of being the watchdog and making sure that they did things honestly.
Is this a question thing too?
Sure. Interrupt me anytime.
With things like that where you know they're talking about things behind your back, have you ever experienced where you just simply FOIA their emails and see if that is something that they talked about that night?
You can do that. I mean, if they really want to get around you, and this is the problem, the law is on our side. The law is there for us to use. It's there for the public to use. You know, if they're doing something, you know, in my hometown, they wanted to put a Walmart in a residential community. It was commercial property, but behind a residential area down by Toledo. Fought it for years. Well, you know, the residents were all asking for all those meetings to be public. There were some people who never said a lot in public. So I've got to assume they said something privately. They probably wouldn't be so foolish as to do it on public email. Public email is FOIA-able. Do you know that? Mm-hmm. I do try to remember that. my email is FOIA-able. You can ask for it. Again, you should be specific, but if you wanted to ask for emails between this person and this person regarding this, which people have done, BNR News did it a few times. I don't know about BNR.com, but the Detroit papers have done it a few times. The Detroit papers have, you know, asked the university, for instance, or somebody else to produce emails about a certain subject. Private emails are not. So, you know, everyone, I think, has some sense to move to their private email, you know, when that happens. Kwame taught us that, if you're using a public phone, your text messages are FOIA-able too. That's part of what brought him down, was that the Detroit neighbors were FOIA-ing his supposedly, seemingly private text messages. And again, some of that was not of a public interest, but some of the things they were discussing were of public interest, which is how it all came up. Okay, what falls under FOIA? If you say, I need this information and I want to FOIA it, and you come to me, my students working on enterprise stories in the advanced reporting class often are working on these big projects, and they're like, I'm going to FOIA this, or they'll put it in their plan. I'm going to FOIA this and get this and get this. What's the first thing I do when I look at that and say, are they going to get that? What's the first thing I look at?
Who they're putting the request through?
Yeah. Who are you asking? What are you looking for? Is it public? And the first thing I look for is it a public agency? Is it public information? Is it something that we already have? I mean, seriously, especially when you're dealing with things like the DDA or something, you might try to FOIA something that's really a private business interest. Students don't always understand the difference. And citizens, when I say students, I'm thinking of people who are just new to this discipline and you're just learning. Much like a citizen, wouldn't understand necessarily that if you're a member of the DDA and you own a business, well, your actions as a member of the DDA are FOIA-able. Memos that you're sending around, that you're using taxpayers' money to make improvements or whatever you're doing, might be FOIA-able, but your own business records aren't. Like, I can't FOIA, your sales records or your business records, or, but we'll get to some things you can get. Okay, so what falls under FOIA, what does not? Private does not fall under FOIA. So usually, I'm often writing back to students and saying, okay, but you can't FOIA that because that's not a public document. Closely related to the next 2 points here are you have to request documents, not analysis. You're not hiring this person to do your work for you. You can't say, hey, look at your budget there and add up all the things you spent on this and this and this and do this for me and give me a total. You can't do that. You might ask that. If it's something like that you wanted, like you want to know what they spent on road improvements over the last 10 years. That's probably something you could FOIA, or you could ask to have the road improvement budget from the last 10 years, and that kind of thing. But if you want specifics about, what kind of materials they used or all these different things, and you're asking them to really go into all these different places, see if you can narrow that a little bit and figure out exactly what it is you're looking for. I do say ask for the information. This is probably in the wrong order. Ask for the information first. I'm always, surprised pleasantly with how much information they will just give you without having to make you FOIA it and having to be a big hassle for everyone. Many government officials are very cooperative. They're very, knowledgeable about the law. They're very knowledgeable about what's public documents. They are very helpful, and they'll give you what you need, especially if they have an interest in getting the information out, which is a lot of the time. I think we always focus on that narrow percentage of, the negative stuff where you're trying to catch them. Jeff Larkham, a former journalist who's now media spokesman for the university, does a great presentation that maybe some of you have seen about, when you FOIA something, you're really looking for the gap. He draws a little, triangle, the gap between what they're saying publicly and what they're really doing. And, if they're doing their job right, if they're taking his advice or whatever, if they're doing their job right, that gap is very, very narrow or non-existent. But if the gap starts to widen between what they're saying and what they're really doing, well, that's when we're trying to get at that, so they should be trying to help us figure that out too. Hopefully they'll help us. That's a good question.
A lot of times when you said, ask before you FOIA, that's pretty individual based as well too, on who gives you what sometimes, right? Not everybody thinks it requires a FOIA. I've gotten things where I was positive I was going to have to FOIA before, and they're like, oh, here you go. And then I'll
if they know it's a public document, they know you can FOIA it, they don't have any big issue with you getting it, they're just, if you say, can I have a copy of that? Oh, yeah. After a city council meeting, you talk to somebody and you say, can I have a copy of that? I think this applies to citizens. If you're at a council meeting and you're a citizen and you're interested in what the plan is for that park or something, they're going to give you copies of the blueprints. They're going to give you copies of the whole thing. They might say you can come in and see them in my office, and you can copy. I'll give you a copy of the contract, or I'll give you a copy of whatever. Or now that things are on email and it's not expensive, an electronic copy, to be able to say, sure, I can let you see that. Once it's public and it's documented, many public officials understand that and they will just share it. So I really say just ask them first. Where you often have to FOIA are things that are sensitive. Police agencies often ask us to FOIA because, I'll get to that in a second, but a lot of times if it's something that people are nervous about, I've had many people, and my students would tell you this, many people who have said, FOIA me on that. Send me a FOIA on that. Because they want to sort of cover their tracks too. They want to make sure they're going to help you get the information. But they don't want to be accused of just putting that out there. They want to sort of show that you were asking for it, that's the best way to show that. Back to what falls under FOIA and what does not. A lot of police records do not fall under FOIA for some time. If it's an ongoing investigation, they can easily deny your request. So that is one area where I often say that reporters maybe do have more access than the average person because we have a working relationship with the police, and they know, they trust us not to do things like naming rape victims, or they trust us not to use the home address of the witness to a crime, or they trust us to do things that are ethical and won't harm the investigation, or maybe they just tell us, I can give you this, I can't give you that. Down the road, and I'm sure I'll tell you that later, but down the road you can get documents about crime, and crime reports are public. The crime statistics are public. We do a lot of that. A lot of people see have the maps, the little things of the crime reports. That's public, but you can get that. But again, form a specific question if you can. I mean, there is a strategy of asking for any and all documents related to this, but be careful what you might ask for. One example I have is older, but we'll all remember it, is the story that the Ann Arbor News did on the President's House. I have a few of these I can pass around, I think. When the President's House was built, there was a lot of controversy over who was paying for that. The president of the university I'm talking about. Let me see, this was from 2003, so we've moved down a bit from this. Here's a couple other copies. I still use this in class because it was a dramatic example of FOIA being used to get at information that they simply would not give us. They simply would not give us to the press. The Ann Arbor News got the story, not the Echo. The Echo did versions of the story. Ann Arbor News got the story in part because they went after it with the FOIA and they paid for it. It was expensive. And they, I believe, asked for any and all documents related to this budget on the President's House, and they got boxes full. Janet Miller, who's still around reporting, has been in my class before to talk about the story. And they FOIA'd documents on the budget pertaining to the University House. And they got numerous, I don't have the number, I'm tucking my fingers in, numerous boxes, file boxes full of documents that she and an attorney and an accountant spent weeks looking through these documents. So this was a major investment by the Ann Arbor News to go after this story. And not a lot of news media can afford that right now. It's just, part of the chilling effect, I feel, in the industry is that if you say to your boss, I got this great idea for a story. Now, I'm going to FOIA this. They'll probably charge me a couple $1,000 for copying. And then I was going to hire this accountant to come in, and I'm going to take 3 weeks off my job, and we're going to sit in this little room, we're going to go over these documents, and I'm going to have to have a lawyer on this. You can see where, eventually the dollar signs are showing, and it's just kind of difficult. So I'm really proud of news organizations that still do this, but it's difficult in some economies, in some cities to do this. But this was an example. In this very second paragraph, it says, the increased price tag was compiled by the News from a review of more than 2,000 pages of university records obtained under the State's Freedom of Information Act. And they did feel they had to FOIA it. They did feel they had not gotten it through regular channels of just asking. And part of it was the way that the budgeting was done was not transparent enough to actually see what was being charged for the house and what was being charged for other things. And it was a good example of somebody using FOIA to get a story that they otherwise might have missed. But again, ask specifically if you can. No phishing. A lot of people refer to this as phishing when you're just sort of saying, oh, no, I think something's funny here. I think that maybe there's some stuff in the budget that's not quite right. So I'm going to just ask them to give me anything dealing with, you know, corruption in the budget, or, I mean, anything, you're gonna just come up with some fishing expedition where you're gonna have to look for something. I don't know, give me anything having to do with, food. Well, that's not very specific. I mean, can we be more specific in saying, okay, can you give me the restaurant tabs for the conference that the council members went to in San Francisco last month? You know, can you ask specifically for this information and then get that data and use that? You can email a request. I often email requests. I often encourage students to email requests. A certified letter is certainly more legal. You know, they have to sign for it. You have all that documentation. An email, you know, you have your sent email. If you put the little thing on there where they have to say, yes, I got this, that might help you a little bit. If you're rapidly looking for something and maybe you're also calling them and saying, I'm sending you a FOIA on this, and they're telling you verbally, oh, no problem, I'll get back to you this week on that, you know, whatever, then maybe you might want to just go ahead and email it. But I usually would recommend certified mail and a follow-up. And, you know, if you don't get the answer that you're supposed to get, you should get some sort of response in 5 days. Danny, is that right? 5 days?
Within 5 days.
And then they can delay it for 10?
To 10 business days. Doesn't include weekends or the response through mail.
Yeah. So, right, so you get an extra 2 days with the post office. So, you know, follow up with them. If you're not getting an answer back by the 5th or 6th day, call them and say what's up. And, you know, again, you know, try to be, I try not to assume they're all lying to us, but, you know, just be assertive. There's a whole big difference between being assertive and being Mike Wallace, rest his soul. I mean, you know, he was great, but, you know, the ambush sort of person, I do think that you often can catch some flies with the honey first, and then if you don't get them, well then, you know, we can be whatever we have to be to get it. Okay, so what they say no, what they tell you, you can't have that. We don't have to discuss the specifics in the video, but I mean, Danny has a situation going on right now where they're saying no, right? So he's filing back, you know, talked to the lawyers for the Michigan Press Association. They said, no, you're in the right. He's going to go back. He's filing an appeal. He's filing an appeal, and you can keep going and try to convince them that you're right. And sometimes it's an education process. Sometimes it's just we are trying to educate them about what the law is and that, yes, we do get this, sorry. What else? Okay, it's a sample FOIA letter that is in the PowerPoint. You can't read this, obviously. But basically, it just says, I request a copy of this. Be specific about what you want. They can charge you. And back to saying no, I was going to talk a little bit about ways that they can delay this. And, you know, I wax poetic about these laws, and I just love them, and this is great and wonderful. But the reality is that it's not always that easy, and that you don't always get what you want. You don't always get it fast. You don't always get it complete. If you didn't ask for the right thing, you're not going to get the right thing. It's easy for them to delay. I think it's easy for them to delay. I think it's easy for them to deny and see if you go away. I think that it's easy for them to make you go away by charging you a lot of money for the information. I've tried, I can't remember, I'm trying to find somebody who remembers exactly what the NRWs paid for those documents, but it was a lot. And I don't know that we all have that in our budgets anymore to do that. So if they're going to charge you a lot, there's a chilling effect there, where we're kind of like, oh, okay, you know. And think about it, you know, if you're a freelancer, or think about it if you're a citizen and you need information on that, you know, box store to build behind you or whatever, you know. Well, there might be a limit to how much you can pay to get this information. As reporters, we often ask for them to waive the fee. We often say that we're writing in the public interest, and we'd like you to waive the fee. They sometimes do it. They sometimes don't. If you forget to ask, they won't do it. We had a case a couple years ago where I had a sports editor for the Echo in my class, and I didn't catch this until he turned in his final report and was making his presentation, and he told me that the university had charged him $75 for this information that he used for the report in my class. And I was like, what? From the back seat, you know, the classroom. I would not ask you to pay $75 to get information for a paper you wrote for me. I think it could have been solved. I don't have to get into all the specifics, I suppose, but I think it could have been solved if he'd been more specific in what he was asking for. He actually had some people who sort of did some analysis to get some information together, and it took time that they didn't feel they should take, and I think they should not have charged him. And by the time I wanted to object and call over there myself and say, no, this isn't fair, the Equid already paid the bill, because he was gonna write it for them too. So they paid it, and they don't have any money, so I didn't like that they paid it either. But I think the university should give it to them for free, but he didn't ask them to, they didn't offer,
And you can get
Awesome.
copy and labor fees, right?
Yes.
For the amount of time it takes to collect the information.
But, copying is supposed to be the lowest paid employee in your staff. It's not supposed to be, you're not supposed to hire an attorney at $350 an hour to photocopy stuff for you. And then, they're not supposed to do that. They're supposed to have the hourly rate of the lowest paid person on their staff, which is usually a clerk, might be $10 an hour or something. And, what you usually can say is, and this is in here too, if you want to give me an estimate of what it might cost, then I can say yes or no,
Or put a clause in there that if it's going to be over
Yeah.
X amount of dollars.
Right, I'm willing to pay $50, but that's it, or I'm willing to pay $10, and that, And with students, I'm like, have them tell you right up front what this is going to cost. In their defense, governments don't have any money either. Newspapers don't have any money, governments don't have any money. And so they're trying to increase fees where they can, sort of pass it back to the user, and we're the user. And so we're asking for this information, and it is taking somebody away from his or her desk to photocopy and find the information. I'm dealing with something right now that I'll tell you about in a minute, where, somebody actually is putting in some legwork for me. And, I'm like, well, okay, let me know what it's going to cost, because I don't want to rack up big bills for something that is might take a long time to find something in the archives or whatever. Okay, I'm messing this up. Can you sing this week? This was fun and apropos of what we're talking about here. Reddit has asked for the White House beer recipe. Apparently, President Obama has a beer that he makes that he likes so much, his staff likes so much that they take it on the road. And so they FOIA'd the beer recipe. Now my reaction was, what? You can't FOIA a beer recipe. It's like FOIAing his personal checkbook or something. You can't FOIA his recipes, right? But it's an election year, so he's going to release it. He's going to release it. But I thought that was funny, that I think the whole thing's been sort of a jest, that they probably could have asked him for it and he would have turned it over.
But what if his staff came up with the recipe? So they're paid with taxpayer dollars.
Do you think they came up with the beer recipe on government time? Because that would be a story.
Right.
That would be a good story. I hope they're not experimenting with beer recipes while they're on my dime.
Doesn't he have a chef though that could have done it?
Yeah. He does have a chef, right, that we're paying for, right? Yeah.
Well, and they're brewing it,
Yeah.
it's being brewed on taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, you guys are tough.
But didn't, I don't know if that FOIA included, but wasn't there a separate FOIA of his beer receipt too? On how much he pays, the taxpayers pay for his drinks out and in. I think that was a separate FOIA as
And
well.
are we allowed to pay for his drinks?
How much
I
does the
guess
president
so.
spend on booze?
Because I think normally we can't charge alcohol, right? I know that for the university,
Should
if we
avoid
go out to
some
dinner with
Right,
If we
businesses
take-
as well.
If businesses and the university, if we take somebody out to dinner for a job interview, or we're at a conference, for instance, and we turn in receipts for what we ate at this restaurant, alcohol is
Like an
separate.
alumni conference?
Hey, that's right. It's supposed to be separate. It's supposed to be personal expense, right? So yeah, I mean, I've been to conferences where, you might have a glass of wine with your dinner and you would say, put that on a separate tab, I'll pay the wine, I'll pay the bar tab myself with personal cash, because it's going back to my employer. So yeah, I don't know, but you guys are good. Anyway, I just thought it was fun. Okay, examples. I've already sneaked in a few examples while we're talking here, but can you guys think of some? I can think of stories that we maybe would not have gotten if a reporter had not known how to use FOIA. And again, these are all reporter examples. I do have a few citizen examples coming up, but
Well, there was that big one at the beginning of the year with the child porn thing at UM and how long it took to report that. I was talking about that on the live chat that the crime reporter for Hanover.com at the time had got wind of all of that and FOIA'd all the records and stuff, found out that I hadn't been reported for 6 months or whatever it was. And that was a story that just wouldn't happen if it wasn't for his deliberation, just
right, or you have
deciding
a little
to
bit
FOIA
of it
and
leak
give
out and be a little tiny story, but yeah, but going after it, it's not, often FOIAs are things that, no offense to my friends in public relations, but they're not gonna get a press release about this, guys. Well, there are things that they are not issuing public statements about. And you're pushing for the public statement, and you're pulling it from them, and you're requesting that information that otherwise is not there. So many documents are online now. I always think that's so easy, but so many documents are online now. City budgets are online, the university budget's online, that you can often go in there and you can sort of look for yourself. So don't be lazy. Don't ask for things that you could easily find yourself. And we have some of the examples at the end here have some lists of places where you can look for information. There's lots of information that's out there that you can just hunt down yourself. You don't have to ask them to do your work for you. But in that case, they probably weren't going to issue a press release with all those numbers and all those details. This is from the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. I'm going to jump ahead here and show you. This is a list of resources at the end. It's also online, so you don't have to write this down. But Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press has a wealth of information, lots and lots of information that will help you as a reporter and will enable you to look in places that you weren't expecting to look. They have a list here of some ways that FOIA has been used to reveal to the public vital information on health and safety, for instance, which is a really valuable use of this. 5 days after the collapse of the World Trade Center, both the mayor of New York City and the Environmental Protection Agency administrator declared the area low risk for environmental dangers. But then the EPA's response to FOIA requests from a New York Daily News reporter helped demonstrate months after the collapse that Ground Zero was contaminated with asbestos and other chemicals and things that we now know. It's been 11 years or so, and we now know that a lot of contamination existed there. But sometimes people are really quick to say, oh, no problem. Well, then when we actually get the numbers later, maybe not so much. There's a Pulitzer Prize-winning article that I still use in class, even though it happened a long time ago. And there's a little tiny newspaper. Help me out if you guys remember this. It's a little tiny newspaper did a story on water pollution in their drinking water in their small town. And I like it because it kind of reminded me of the Aaron Brockovich story. It's kind of like, the water was contaminated and nobody was telling us. Well, it's sort of the same thing, where a newspaper editor in a small town went to pay his water bill, and he was standing in line to pay his water bill on his lunch hour, and he happened to look on the back of the bill, and he saw that there was a list of chemicals that they were testing for in the water. It was just a little notice. And, I always use it as an example of, pay attention. There's stories everywhere. And he went back to the office, and he handed it to a reporter, and said, this is kind of interesting, and handed it to her. And, I always joke about, okay, so then what? Did she take a month off and look into this and investigate this and win a Pulitzer? No, it was a very small paper, had a very small staff. She was already working very long hours, which, forgive my bias, but I do think that the smaller the paper, the harder you work, the more things you cover, the more hours you work, because you cover everything. But I started out at a weekly. That was the hardest I ever worked in my life, because you're doing all kinds of things at all kinds of hours. And this woman had many, many beats. You start out, you cover many, many beats. You don't just get one beat. And she made time for this and sort of started checking on the contaminants in the water and what these were and what this meant. And she got FOIA documents from the state on what these levels are supposed to be versus what they are here, and had a heck of a story. And what often happens, this happens and it's kind of frustrating, but it's also a good thing, when she was FOIAing the information from the city, they quickly issued a press release saying, we're correcting a problem with the water, and they try to get that press release out before your story hits. And it's kind of frustrating because you're working on a story for a couple months, and all of a sudden they're correcting the problem the day before your story comes out. But you also as a citizen and as a reporter can know that you affected that change. You caused that to happen. There was very much, I think of Aaron Brockovich because one of the stories in the series that she wrote talked about how they had switched the water in City Hall. They weren't letting people drink from the drinking fountains. They had replaced all the drinking fountains with bottled water dispensers. While they were telling the community that the water was safe to drink. They also were doing that. But again, it's one of those things where health and safety is a huge issue, and you're trying to find out if the public perception meets reality. Let me see. 2003 Dayton Daily News reported the results of dozens of FOIA requests from the Peace Corps on the risks of Corps volunteers, especially women, had faced abroad from violence, accidents, disease, and suicide. Who's heard of this? That women who join the Peace Corps are victimized, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's higher than it should be, that are victimized in lots of ways. I know of someone, one of our former students who was assaulted, and it's horrible. And, she's become a spokesman in some ways for this. To get the message out, to let people know that there's a danger in going to foreign countries where the culture might be different toward women and attitudes might be different, and you're staying with strangers in strange homes and things happen. I had not heard a lot about this, but the newspaper reported this through interviews and travel, showing the agency's own statistics masking the dangers of which volunteers were exposed to around the world and what they were encountering. It previously had used FOIA to show that women in the U.S. military endured cavalier responses to rape charges brought against enlisted men and officers, many of whom had been accused before. And it shows what the response was to this. We got FOIA documents about that. Another one of the examples that you can find in this listing here. Several reports have spotlighted the mismanagement of funds intended for those affected by Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. A lot of people followed the money, which was the old Watergate statement, that followed the money, who got the contracts, who got the contracts for Katrina, who got to rebuild, who got to do this, all kinds of things where something happens, it doesn't just smell quite right, and you FOIA the document and you find out that, this is kind of interesting. Another student example, this is getting a little yellow, but I'm going to carry this around for a while because I was really proud of these kids. Nathan Bomi and Jason Adolsky, who were both great journalism students and are still working in journalism. Nathan Bomi is now at the Free Press. He was in Harvard.com for a while, for a long time. They did this for the Echo, and one or both of them used it for class too, I think. Attendance figures don't add up, documents show. You're all familiar with this, right? The little scandal that we got into at Eastern with the attendance at the football games. Suffice to say, they were cooking the numbers. They were kind of, pumping up the numbers a little bit for, maybe they had good reasons. Maybe they had, they were trying to not get us kicked out of the league, but they were not adding up the numbers. So how would this story come about? How would you get at that? First of all, what would be the first inkling? I think if Nathan and Jason were here, they would tell you they just sort of
empty football games.
Yeah, I think this started because Echo people. I should let them tell you, but Echo people were going to football games and saying, "Wow, no one's here," and then they would read a press release. They would talk about record attendance, or and they were kind of and then they discovered, okay, well, they're counting the band, and they're counting the trainers, but still. Yeah, so they FOIA'd attendance records, how many tickets were actually sold, there's copies of some of their documents, they FOIA'd. I'll pass this around, you can read it. But it was a great story. Their lead, football attendance figures reported by the Eastern Michigan Athletic Department for the 2004, so it's been a while, home season differ drastically from official documents recently obtained by the Echo. The number of fans who actually attended each EMU home football game last year is uncertain, after an investigation by the Echo turned up a web of conflicting documents that don't agree on the actual attendance in any of the 5 games at Ryerson Stadium. If I remember correctly, the baseball team was involved. They were sort of having the guys click, 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 click. You didn't necessarily have to have somebody walking by and just keep clicking that clicker because we're trying to count. And it was a great story. And not everybody thought that it was wonderful at the time. They took some heat for that. But it was a great story, and they stuck with it. Jason is also trained as an actuarial, which means he's very good with numbers, and he worked on that. And Nathan is tenacious, and they put that together. It was a great story, and it serves both of them well. And we're almost 9 years later. A great story. Okay, here's another story. This is a little old too, but these are people. Why do we have the right to know? This is one of those stories that comes out where papers are trying to show you too what FOIA can do for a community. They're trying to help show how citizens can actually use this. Mike and Linda Raymond couldn't get answers about what was buried in their landfill near their home, so the Woburn, Massachusetts couple used an obscure, I think that's fine, but powerful tool to uncover the truth. The Freedom of Information Law allows ordinary citizens to keep government accountable on everything from environmental safety to teacher certification, why we have the right to know. It talks about exactly what you're able to get and how you can get it. And as a regular citizen, you can look this up and you can get this information. Okay, I want to share a few things that are more citizen-type things, actually. But, oh, here's one. This is one. This is a letter. Journalism educators across the country were sending in for this video because we had heard that this was kind of an ironic response. That the Department of Defense made this video. It was a training video on the FOIA. Okay, FOIA training video, and the title of it was "The People's Right to Know." So somebody apparently asked for this video, and they were told that you can't have it. So they put out this email list, summons to all the journalism professors and said, how about if we all ask for this? So we all started writing letters asking for this video, and we all got the same response, which was, please be advised that the video was produced for use within the Department of Defense and not intended for public release. And they wouldn't give it to us for a really long time. And then I finally got it a year or two later. I think I finally got this video in the mail. And it had a sticker on it that some of it had been, I guess we can say censored because it was the government. But when you played the video, I used to play this in class, it's kind of old now. I used to play it in class, there actually were big chunks of it that were blacked out because it was things they didn't want us to know. Kind of interesting. Okay. Let's talk a little bit, you can see these questions, don't be shy. Let's talk a little bit about things you can do that are not necessarily government information, but you might think of it as something that you may want to get from the government or from other agencies, and how you can put that together. Can I be over here?
Yeah, I'll check it, yeah.
Okay. First of all, do y'all know a librarian? Are y'all friends with a librarian? Okay, well, make that your resolution. Everybody needs to know a librarian. Librarians are fabulous. They know everything. We have several of our students have gone on to get masters in library science and are librarians and are good resources for us. And they're great resources for journals of every kind. I say, you know, you always should be very kind to librarians and secretaries. You should first be kind to them because you're good people. And you should secondly be kind to them because they know everything. They can help you forever, that they just know everything. Margaret Leary, some of you know Margaret Leary, she writes for the Echo. She's a graduate student now. She was in my advanced reporting class last fall, and she put together a great list for me. Some of these links are broken, which is why I didn't put it up there, but I'll pass this around. She put together a great list for me of things that are public links where you can look for information. She's fabulous because not only is she a librarian, but she's an attorney. She's retired after managing the law library at the U of M, and is back here continuing her education and writing for the Echo and just blowing us away. But she, as a librarian, was able to, as part of her graduate work, was able to show my class and cool places to look for information and good things. But first of all, things that people don't always understand. Do you know that you can look up the tax records, not just on your house, but on your neighbors? Do you know that that's public? Why would you want that information, other than just being nosy? And I know most of you don't have houses yet, but why would you want that information? Why would your parents want that information?
See if they're overpaying.
Yeah, I mean, if you live in a place where every house on the street is kind of the same, you know, maybe the same size, maybe built the same year, your taxes should probably all be kind of the same, right? In the same range. So you might want to check that out, right? Now, how would you check that out? Isn't that private? How can you look up your neighbor's tax bill?
Should be right on the website for that township.
Yeah, it should be right. Not everybody's on there yet, but the city of Ypsilanti is. Yeah, there's a link to that in here. But you can look that up. You can look it up. Where I live, I tried to do this in class, but where I live is in a township, and it's more rural, and they're not online yet. But a lot of places you can look it up. You can look up your address. We tried to do a class in Kansas before. But you can put the address in and try to find out your neighborhood. But it's a great example of how citizens might just want to know this. What if they look on there and they see that they are paying a lot more than their neighbors, they don't think that's fair, or maybe it says their house is worth X and they tried to sell it for less than that last year and they couldn't sell it, and
Then they can appeal it.
yeah, so what do? Where they go? They can appeal it to the board review, and which is also a public open body. And you can go there. It's really interesting to do a story on this and watch how they do this. Somebody comes in and you have evidence, of the neighbor's tax bills maybe, or maybe sales records in the neighborhood, and you can make your case. And you can walk out owing lower taxes than you did yesterday, which is amazing. There's lots of ways that citizens can use this information. Let me see. You can go to the EMU website and look at our budget. You can see just about everything on there. There's different places where you can get into what they spend on different things. So I mentioned earlier, go in there and sort of do your homework. You can go in there and look for things yourself and get there. But if you're a student and you want to know what they're spending on such and such, or maybe you're just upset about how much money they're wasting on that Eastern Echo. This darn paper keeps writing those negative stories, and I want to know how much we're paying for this out of our student fees. And what's the answer? Krista knows the answer. Zero. Unlike almost any student newspaper you could mention, the Eastern Echo gets zero from the student fee and very little from the general fund. There's a slight contribution. They do pay Kevin Devine to oversee what's going on down there. He is a university employee. They occasionally throw us some old computers or something, but they don't support us in the way that Michigan State does, or Central does, or even Monroe County Community College does. They don't support them in that way. But that's interesting information. If you're a student there and you're upset, as we have had students from time to time who are upset about the paper, and you want to get all mad about it, we kind of take pride in this. We take pride in being poor. We take pride in the fact that we're very self-supporting, and I say we, but actually I'm not part of it either. I'm only part of it as a volunteer. It's not part of the English department or part of the journalism program. It's totally separate, and we try to support them, but it's all just in spirit. I don't give them a lot of money. I buy them donuts once in a while. You don't have much support, and the university doesn't put money into it. But that's good to know. If you're really mad at the newspaper, there have been a few times in our history when we had people pretty ticked about something, and it felt kind of good to say, we're independent. And you want to complain about the ads? There's some ads that make me upset too. There's some ads that sort of are not so great, but why we're self-supporting. So if we want to take an ad from someplace that is running a business that maybe we're not happy about, we have to defend the right to do that. So it's an interesting perspective on who we are, and it's one of the things you can find out about the budget. Let me see. All of the university press releases are up there. That's a good piece of information. Let me see. Catrice Stafford did some great stories last year on retention rates and graduation rates at the university, and how many people are graduating versus how many people are never graduating, and they're coming to school here and we're losing them somehow. Either they're dropping out or they're going to another school. I maintain from knowing the students that they're going to finish. It's just going to take them a while. They're going to finish. But we have a different category of students. Our students have jobs, they have families, they often commute. They're not the same kind of student who just comes here and 4 years later wants out with a degree. They often have all kinds of stuff go down. But there's a lot of pressure and attention and light shined on why isn't this happening. Well, Catrice did a very illuminating story on that topic. And a lot of this information is available just online. You can look and you can get lots of information on peer retention rates. Our peer schools, who are our peer schools? I think you could argue about some of these, but some of our peer schools were maybe compared with other MAC schools, perhaps, or, and they're like, we're nothing like Central, right? But we get compared to them. There's different schools that, you're the same size, you're in the same state, so they assume you're the same. But, anyway, I'll pass this around to you. There's some interesting, the Board of Regents meetings, the agendas are online, the minutes are online, there's budget information online. We don't have a lot of regular students who just decide to go over there. We don't have a lot of people other than folks with something specific to say. And perhaps the greatest site that she shared with us was the history of Ann Arbor, Ann Arbor Chronicle, the old newspapers. And old newspapers are online. There's a site at the very bottom that you should probably copy down, where you can go in and look at old newspapers that are actually scanned and online. You can put old papers about Ann Arbor and find out some good information. Okay. A few sites I wanted to make sure I mentioned. I'm not sure if you're familiar with these. Anybody use Pacer? Has anybody ever used Pacer? There are lots and lots of private search companies that are coming up that actually will charge you a fee, but will do your work for you. I this summer had reason to get an old obituary from the Toledo Blade. That I went online, I found the old obituary from the 60s, I think it was the 70s. I found the obituary. There's other people who've already done the work for me. It's there. I think I paid $5 to have the Toledo Lucas County Library print that out for me and mail it to me. And I thought, okay, what are my options? I can drive to Toledo. I can pay to park. I can go in and look for this. It might take me an hour. It might take me longer. Who knows where it's at. I can look for this. I can make a copy myself. It will cost me maybe 25 cents. It was way worth my while paying $5, right? There are lots and lots and lots of places that do your work for you in that way. So if you have any sort of budget as a journalist or even as a citizen, any sort of budget that you can throw at this, and you can put a little bit of money into gathering things, you can get information. Pacer is, I think it's pacer.com. You guys can check that out. You can look up federal court cases. You can look up.
I think it's .gov.
.gov. Okay, thanks. Oh, it's a government site. Okay. You can look up federal court cases. I have bankruptcy listed here, although I think bankruptcy is somewhere else too. Federal circuit cases, federal district cases. If there's something you're tracking down and you think there was a court case about it, you can look on there and find it. And they charge you like 8 cents a page. Which, you know, if you can look and look and look for free, and then occasionally you find something that you want, and you put it out, it's 8 cents a page. That's pretty good. That's one site. Are you familiar with GuideStar? Do you know much about looking up nonprofit organizations? Now, this is sort of a gray area between government and private nonprofit organizations that have tax status as nonprofit organizations, 501c3 organizations. You know what that is? Most of your charities, most of your Boy Scouts, most of your churches are churches. Churches are not, are they?
501c3?
I don't think they file the form. Do they file the form?
I think they're different. I think
they're different because of the separation of church and state. I don't think they're required to file the same forms that a 501c3 does. You might be right. But a private school, a charity, you can look up things like how much of the charity's income goes to paying the administrator, and what kind of car do they buy for the administrator, and how old is it? Did they buy it? You know, if you see, I don't know. I hate to pick on charities because they're all just barely making it as it is, but if you happen to see somebody who ran a charity in your town, and they happen to be dressing really well and driving a really nice car, and you thought, my goodness, how can they possibly do that? You know, we're always scraping it together to give them a $25 donation. How would you check that out? How would you be able to figure out, is she paid very well? Is that car his, or did they buy it for him? How would you find that out? One way is GuideStar online. I think that's org. Chris would check that out too. You can look up the organization. It's really easy, and then they send me emails all the time, so I've looked up a lot of places. You can look up organizations that you give money to see whether they actually give a certain percentage of their intake to charitable concerns or not. Why might you want to look that up?
Well, if you're donating to them, you're going to want to know how they're spending their money.
Yeah, I mean, so really, as a private citizen, you might have a reason to do that, right? As a reporter, you might have a reason to do it, right? I mean, there's always sort of controversy over who's spending.
Don't they receive tax deductions too?
They don't.
And tax exemptions?
Yeah, tax exemptions. And also, if you donate money to them, you get a charitable write-off for that.
Yeah.
So you might want to track that in some ways. I guess I'll say this on video. Some of these stories I'm telling are a little bit weird. I was laughing because Will's here because my husband just told me this story about he was looking at a 501c3 thing on the Michigan Hockey Association because there was some chatter online. There was chatter online about there's an Oakland County coach or father or somebody who's suing the Michigan Hockey Association. It was like the Little League for hockey players. over how much they're spending on what, or whatever. And so Charlie saw some chatter on there about, how this all works. So he went on the GuideStar and he looked it up and sent the guy an email and said, oh, well, you can look it on here. It tells you like how much the guys paid and what they're spending money on and how it all works. And, if you want to, you can get a copy of their IRS statement and you can check it out. Like, so, if it's just a lot of disgruntled coaches and dads sitting around complaining about this, well, okay, check it out. Somebody in the crowd can check it out.
There
Now,
are plenty of those. There are plenty of those.
yeah, so it's interesting because all it takes is one person, one dad in the room who's a reporter will say, I'll check it out, whatever, but if you just can do it. And often the person in the room who knows how to do this is the reporter, but, I maintain this is information everybody should have. I have a lot of students who are not journalism majors and not journalism minors, and this is all information, they should all have this, it's great. Edgar. It's an SEC site. If you go to SEC, like Sam, EC, Securities and Exchange Commission.gov, Edgar is their search engine. You'll find information on public corporations. Bankruptcy information is there. So now, we're back to that gray area where I said before that private information is not available, right? Just government? Well, there are these areas where private and government intersect, and one of them is bankruptcy, right? And if you're a private person or a private company, if you're a company and all of a sudden you're traded on the stock exchange, then what? Then you're public. So, I think they think long and hard about this. A private family-owned corporation, for instance, or maybe a little family-owned newspaper that I used to work for. If you work for a little family-owned newspaper, it's your business. Nobody knows. Not even your employees know. Nobody knows what's going on. All of a sudden, you're traded publicly. You have the net, or you're somebody else who's traded on the stock exchange. Then the public has a certain level of availability. There's a certain level of availability of information to the public that they can get. Okay, so why would you need bankruptcy information?
Your companies or private individuals?
Either.
Well, there's a lot of exemptions they give when they file for bankruptcy, right? That could cost taxpayer dollars and things like that.
What if the company that's going bankrupt owes the city money? The city's not going to get the money, right? And there's lots of ways that you would not, that you might be interested in who they owe money to or how this all works. Let me see. I know of a politician recently who was running for office, and he used to run a company that was rumored to have gone bankrupt. So how would you find that out? You go to this Edgar site and you look up this company, and they went bankrupt, which was somewhat public knowledge. They went bankrupt. And then you might look at who they owe money to. We have this guy who's running for office, and he walked out on debts, which is what bankruptcy is all about, is you just say, sorry, right? Walked out on debts that were owed to certain individuals in the town and certain whatever. I don't know. Is that information you might want to know? Maybe. Or maybe if you're, as a citizen, if you're one of the aggrieved parties, maybe he owed you money. Maybe you did some work for him. I worked for a guy in New Jersey. I'll tell you all about him if you want to. On video. I worked for a guy in New Jersey when I was in grad school. I did some freelance writing for him. He still owed me $1,500 because he went bankrupt. And I was a poor graduate student, working in the middle of the night for him, writing stories for him. And he used them in his little newsletter. And then the ad person called me up one night and said, his Bob Pager. And I said, well, he paid me last month. And she goes, no, this month. I said, no. And she said, he's going bankrupt. So I called him, and he was going to send me so much per week. And it was, 15 years ago, so I'm sure the check's in the mail. But my point is, I go online and look up his bankruptcy. He was rumored to have a house in the Hamptons. His main office was in New Jersey. He was a big fish. So, I never really investigated it, but I could have. I could have checked out who else does he owe money to. Maybe I can't cause him much trouble, but maybe I can call somebody else that he owes money for, and together we can, scream loud enough that maybe you get paid, or something. But yeah, I bring him up every once in a while. I was getting that check into. I've had some recent personal experience with Ancestry.com. Has anybody ever used Ancestry.com for their family genealogy work? a lot of, people, a lot of, if you have elderly relatives, they're probably all on there. The senior citizens are really into genealogy, and they share it with the kids and put it on there. I went on there and found out, one of my relatives sent me an email. It turns out that a lot of my family was already researched because some other cousin had done it. And so, and one side of my family goes back pretty far, I guess. But I didn't do the research, it was already on there. Why would a reporter want to use Ancestry.com? I learned so much this summer by working on this project that I'll tell you about. But why would a reporter use Ancestry.com? You look on there to research your ancestors, right? To research your
Marriage records, death records, are there tax records on
Have
there?
you ever been on there? I haven't found tax records, but I wouldn't say that they're not there. It's possible that there's tax records, like property tax records, like sometimes there's census records on there where you can see who lived where and which year and what their address was if you're trying to figure out when your family, came to the state or moved here or did this. What else? You said marriage and death records.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. There's divorce records on there. And what do these records tell you? Sometimes they give you the year. Sometimes they give you the name of the other spouse. Sometimes they say if there were children. Now you can see where if you're a genealogist, there's lots and lots, give you one for example. If you're a genealogist, there's lots and lots of ways that you can use this information, right?
They also
if you're
give you
a
like
reporter-
the related people. So if you're looking for a family member of that person to contact now,
Yeah.
it's great.
Yeah, and there's lots of reasons. Reporters look for people all the time. Reporters are always hunting for people who, used to be in charge of this, and I'm trying to do something on the history of this, or I'm trying to do something on the trend of funding for this. And women are just a real problem because they change their names. So it's hard to find women. Men are easier to find. If you have a birth date especially, or a rough age of the person, you can usually track them down. The problem with tracking down men is that they often have multiple people in their family who are named the same name. So that's difficult. With women, the problem is they change their name. Okay. Interrupt me if you have questions. I'm going to move on and tell a personal story that I think relates to this, but it does two things. It shows you how I use my journalism to get some really interesting information. But it also tells you how, as a private citizen, you might want to use this. I mean, I did this for my own personal information, but it's because I put this together because I know how to use these tools. When I was 14 years old, my grandfather, who lived next door, was murdered. Some of you guys have heard this. I tell this in class, in the FOIA class. My grandfather, who lived next door, was murdered. He'd been holed up at a party store. He was 68 years old. They worked 2 nights a week, and it was a Tuesday night. It was his night to work. And these 2 guys came in, and they took him out on a deserted country road, and they shot him in the head. And so that was 1972. Do the math, I'm 54. That happened. Okay, so that was out there, our family knew about it. It just sort of was in the family. We didn't talk about it very much, it was whatever. Okay, so on the 30th anniversary, which would have been 2002. So it was happening in 2002. I wasn't teaching that day. I was home. I was cleaning my house, and I was thinking about this because it happened on the first day of spring. So every year on the first day of spring, when the weather's nice and it's March 21st, I'm always like, oh, just like this. I remember that day really well. So I thought, I wonder whatever happened. One of the guys who killed him, there's 2 guys. One of the guys was murdered in prison back in the 70s. But the other guy was still in prison for life. And I always kind of wondered, and he was from our area. He grew up, I discovered this just recently, that he grew up in a house that's just a few miles from where I live now. So I always kind of wondered about that. So on this day, 30th anniversary of this, I'm cleaning my house and I'm thinking about this. And I decided to go look him up. So I go online, and I go to these amazing tools we have now, we didn't have 34 years ago, and I can look up the guy's name and find out what prison he was in. He was in Leavenworth at the time, I think. And where he was in for kidnapping, because he'd done this to other people, and they had kidnapped them all and then murdered them, so it was never just a robbery and a killing, it was a kidnapping. And I find him, and I get this idea that I want to read about this, because all I ever heard were the stories I heard in my family, and I was living next door, so I heard everything, and I'm the oldest, and I was sort of involved in a lot of stuff. But I didn't know the real story. So I got online, And I went to the Michigan State Police website. And they have a spot on there where you can FOIA information on crimes. Now, if the murder had just happened, I would have been told no. I would have been told it's under investigation, or they might have given me some really basic information, but they probably wouldn't have given me everything they gave me. I went on there, I typed in information on my grandfather and on another man that killed the same night at a gas station. I typed in the information down that I wanted, any information they had on these two crimes. And I checked the box where it said, yes, I'll pay for it, which was probably stupid, because I didn't know what I was going to pay. So I kind of, I did this, and it kind of put it on my mind. And a week or so later, I get this nice big manila envelope in the mail, this thick, with every police report and every investigative report, right down to the addresses of the witnesses, I mean, everything. It was all in there with a bill for $35, which I think the bill will be higher now, but this was 10 years ago. And I was glad to pay $35 for this monumental bit of information. And I sat down and I read this envelope full of crime report, full of police reports. And I got more information than some people wanted to know. I mean, the rest of my family didn't want to really read all this. It was kind of ugly. All this information on these people who killed 7 people in this way. They were prison escapees from Ohio, and they had gone on a 6-state crime spree. And in 6 states, they had killed 7 people in 5 weeks. And then they were caught because when their relatives turned them in. And they were never tried for any of the murders. They were tried for kidnapping and sent away for life for 2 kidnappings, which were happened in Toledo, and the bodies were found in Michigan. They had brought them across state lines and killed them. Okay, so why am I telling you this? This is all very interesting. I mean, the FOIA, the basics of this were, this is just a citizen. I never said I'm a reporter giving this information. I'm just a citizen. I got this information. And every time I tell this story in class, which is like once a year, I have a student who comes up to me afterwards and says, I have this story, I want to get this information, and they find information about something that happened in their family. One time it was a house fire that happened, somebody died in a house fire in the 60s, and they wanted to get this information, and they wanted to get this. So it helps people just find out about their families, find out information. The other thing it can do is help you dredge up an old case, because this year was the 40th anniversary. So I got online around January, and I said, is that guy still alive? He's 67 now. I go online, I get goosebumps thinking about this. I went online, and it said, scheduled for release, April 10th, 2012. And I went, oh, that's got to be a mistake. I think he killed some people. So I went online, and nope, it said he was in Terre Haute Federal Correctional Institute in Terre Haute, Indiana, and he was going to be released April 10th. And I was like, well, that's not really released, because he was an escapee from Ohio at the time they committed these crimes. So I'm sure he's going back to Ohio, right? Or is he coming to Michigan? Because there's no statute of limitations. We always thought that if you ever got out, it was coming here. So I, seriously, as a citizen, I never even at this point said that I was a reporter or anything. I sent an email to our local prosecutor. And I said, do you guys know about this guy? It looks like he's going to get out, and he killed my grandfather, and we're kind of interested in seeing him not get out of jail. And, not that we hold a grudge, but this guy's a serial killer. And we do hold a grudge. But so the prosecutor called me and said, why don't you stop in and talk about this? I mean, we didn't know about this. And so I went downtown, and I talked to the prosecutor. And I did finally, in the interest of self-disclosure, of, full disclosure, I did tell him that, what it was, since I was a reporter. My husband's a reporter, and, my husband, whatever. Anyway, long story short, we're looking at charges. I mean, he might be brought to Michigan this month and have a preliminary exam for the murder of my grandfather and another fellow. And I just last week touched base with a family in Indiana who was one of the other victims, which is so far the worst story that I've heard, where they killed this guy who was a 25-year-old gas station attendant. And he was an off-duty police dispatcher. And he always carried a gun, but he left his gun home that night because there'd been some prowlers in the neighborhood and his pregnant wife was scared. So he left the gun home with her and went to work, and it was his cousin's gas station. And his cousin was supposed to work and needed some help and called him and said, will you come in tonight? And so this 25-year-old kid went in there and worked. And they took him out in the country and they killed him. And his pregnant wife and his 4-year-old son were home. And they're, There's been problems, those kind of things go on forever. The cousin still blames himself for making it work, the wife blames herself for keeping the gun, the son, broke and killed himself. I mean, he never got sort of over this. So there's all these things. Anyway, it's such a dramatic story. And it all came from that FOIA. I mean, in terms of my life, it all came from that FOIA. And this is a citizen thing. This is not a journalism thing, although I may end up writing about it before my life's over. But, this is what's going on.
So
but
did they hold
interesting.
him? He was supposed to be released in April 2012 or 13?
Ohio, 2012, he was released.
He was
There
released.
was a day, I was at EMU, and I went on the line and checked it on April 10th, April 11th, it said released. It was scary. But I knew by then, because I'd been calling everybody, and but FOIA started all this, and I just FOIA'd Indiana last week. I'll tell you about that. But they,
Did they rearrest him, or?
Ohio had a detainer on him to come back to Ohio because of that old charge. But the old charge was forgery. He was only in for forgery on the original case. And they're looking at this going, we served 40 years in the federal penitentiary. He's up for parole in July. So he was up for parole in July. And my brother and I went to Toledo and testified for the parole. We did a video conference with the parole board in Columbus. And it's just something I've never, would never imagine that you have to experience.
So is he out and about now?
He's in Allen Prison in Lima, Ohio. I'll show you his picture. He's been pumping iron for 4 years. We've been feeding him. He's been working out, and looks like he could cause a lot of damage. And his plan, I'm saying this on video, his plan, according to his family, his children are on my side. His children that was in the newspaper, and his daughter emailed me and said, I'm really sorry about the murder of your grandfather. I am his daughter. And we have been hidden with his stepfather's name their whole life. And they have gone to the parole board, and his ex-wife and his 3 kids have all gone to the parole board and begged that he not be released because they're afraid of him. But it's just fascinating, interesting, and I sort of put on my PR hat all summer because I got stories in Toledo Blade and the Monroe paper. Monroe paper wasn't there at the time. And the Toledo Blade, and I had an online petition, and I had a Facebook page, and all that. Speaking of private Facebook pages, it's not linked to my one here. It's sort of my other life, but fascinating. But again, I'm telling you this because this is all the use of FOIA as a citizen. This is what I was able to do as a crime victim or a member of a crime victim's family to be able to do this. Then, last week, I get an email from this family in Indiana, who they were not even part of this whole parole process all summer. They didn't even know about all this. The widow of the gas station attendant in Toledo does. She's in Illinois. I talk to her almost every day when I speed dial. She's going to come to the preliminary hearing. Anyway, all this is going on. But we didn't know about this family in Indiana. And I get this email from them, and they said, oh my gosh, he was up for parole this year? They said that somebody in Ohio had told one of their family members that he was released from Terre Haute. And if you go online, it says released. It doesn't say that he went to Ohio. And the family was frantic that he had been released. And then they Googled him, and they found my stuff. And they realized that we had fought it, and that he was still in prison. He was still in jail, and he's there, and we'll see. So now we have 3 families that are actively fighting it, and we have another one that's not so actively fighting it. And then there's other families in Mississippi, in Tennessee, in Chicago, that we don't know who they are. We can't find the victims' families, but we will, because I'm doing this. Anyway, I'm sorry, long story short, or shorter, is I used Ancestry.com to find all kinds of people. I wanted to find, I may use this in class this year, I wanted to find the sister of the murderer and see if she was still living here, because the family members told me that his parole plan is to come live with a nephew who lives immediately across the street from the party store where they kidnapped my grandfather. His plan is to come out and live in that party store. And I'm like, he's going to walk over there and buy his cigarettes? We don't want that. And not to mention that it's also a mile from my sister's house. And I have sisters who still live in that neighborhood, and none of us really want to walk into him. So we're upset that he's going to come back and live in that community when he's a senior citizen, and my grandfather couldn't. Anyway, so I wanted to see, his nephew lives right behind my sister. Like, you could throw a ball and hit his porch. His nephew was right behind there. Another nephew was going to take him and he lived somewhere else. Anyway, I wanted to find the sister who had housed him when he was committing these murders in 1972. I wanted to find out if she was still alive, and where is she? Because she housed him the last time, and she didn't take him this time. And I couldn't find her. And I got on Ancestry.com, and I tracked her down through marriage records and divorce records. She's been married and divorced. Her third husband just died. And I was able to track, she lives in Virginia or West Virginia, I was able to track her movements to other states and other marriages. And I finally found an obituary for her husband, which was gold, because it had all the names. Obituaries are golden. Which, I mean, for a reporter, for a genealogist, obituaries are golden. I was able to go in there and find all the names of all the people in the family, and then I started punching in every name in Facebook until I hit one that didn't have any privacy settings, and then I had everybody's picture and everybody's everything, and I found her. She looks just like him. I found her. She's there. So I know where she lives, I know who she is, I know what her name is now, and I send it off to the Michigan State Police. And she's hopefully, they're going to talk to her. But, all that goes together. It's just fascinating. The other thing is, I was talking about the woman in Indiana who was the widow of the gas station attendant. The only name I had for her was the name that she used in 1972, when she had a 1-year-old baby, and her husband was killed at this gas station in Toledo. So that's all the information I have on her. I didn't even have a first name, just had that. And I looked and looked and looked online. I looked and looked and looked online and found nothing. I could find nothing on them. They lived in California. He had just moved here from California. Finally, I found on a genealogy site where this Christine had posted a message that said, "My father was Joseph Satcher, and he was killed in Toledo, Ohio, in March of 1972. And I have no information about his family. If anybody knows anything about him, contact me." And I was like, this has got to be her. And her name, she'd been adopted after her father died by her stepfather, so her name had changed. Then she got married, her name changed again. She now lives in Florida, and she's a nurse, and boy was she surprised when I called her. I mean, her name is, she's changed her name 3 times. She's lived in like 3 or 4 different states. She's now a 42-year-old nurse, because she was a baby when he died. So a 42-year-old nurse living in Florida. And one morning, I went through all these Ancestry.coms and white pages and searches online and all this stuff and found her phone number. And I called her and she answered the phone. And I said, "Are you Kristen Satcher?" And she was like, "Florida." "Yeah." And I said, "I'm calling from Toledo." And told her who I was and that we were fighting the parole, and they went to the parole board. But it was just amazing. And again, I'm back to my point of being here tonight, is that I think all these things are lessons that citizens need to hear, not just journalists. I hope that there's lots of ways that journalists can use all this information. But I'm an advocate for everybody using these tools. It's out there, it's great. Ancestry.com, I joined, I think I paid $40 for the summer, and boy, was that worth it. I got so much return out of that, I can't even tell you. And just in terms of these marriage licenses, these death records, all this ancestry information. And again, it's all information that's government records where somebody else, you mentioned before, other people have done the work for us and it's on there. You can go find the marriage records and divorce records, and other people have done all that research. And I'm happy to pay somebody $10 for this document if it's going to save me a month worth of legwork and going to libraries and sitting through different things. Anyway, okay, I'm talking way too much. You haven't asked enough questions. Do you have any questions? I'll pass around my cartoon here. Are you sure we don't need government in the sunshine? This is, they're asking a politician. Are you sure we don't need government in the sunshine? Trust me. How will we know if you're doing anything wrong? Trust me. What if we don't trust you? Well, without government in the sunshine, you just have to. It's kind of the response we sometimes get. Okay, other questions, other things that you were hoping I'd talk about that I didn't talk about? There's some sites, if you go to this site on here, each one of these sites is a wealth of information. There's lots of links there to other things, other places.
Did you pass out the resources list, or is that just on the PowerPoint
You know what, it's
online?
not, it's on the PowerPoint, it's online. If you want me to send you that page, I will. You all have my email? If you want me to send you that, I will. We have no questions from cyberspace either, right?
Kristen.
I'm asking.
Okay. That's okay. Maybe they know all this. Actually, I often think people who come to this, or people who would seek out this, they already know how to do this somewhat. You already have an inkling that it exists and how to do it. But it's really cool. And I mean, all summer I've been sort of just laughing every time I have some little success with this. I keep joking that I'm going to be a detective in my next life now because I found all these people that were unfindable. And it's very interesting. And there's so many applications for journalism. that my enterprise class is in trouble this year because, you have to keep that ancestry.com thing under your hat, because there's some things where I'm gonna ask them to do some things and see if they can figure it out. But, I mean, you could have heard me scream the night that I found that woman in Virginia. I mean, when I found that picture of her and it came out that looked just like her brother, and I was like, oh my, I was like, bingo, and this was like, the greatest achievement of my summer. That and breaking my toe in the subway in Chicago. So yeah, I'm happy to come back to work. Questions, anything you wanted to talk about that we could get to? Okay, well, you all know where I am, so if I can help you, I can help you, I'll try. I don't have all this. I was going to open up by saying I'm not an attorney. I don't know all the fine points on this. When you're talking to MPA, they know a lot more about this than I do. I usually know the practical stuff. I usually know, asking for a say this, do that. I usually know how to finesse it and get through it. But it's fun. It's a puzzle. It's like a word game. It's like finding out how you can do it. It's like being a detective. It's like, okay, this doesn't smell right. This doesn't feel right. I'm gonna look for this. I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna try to do it. Okay, I'm gonna shut up. Questions? No? Okay, thank you all.